View the startling description of Custer's last stand by Windolph. A member of the U.S. Army, Charles Windolph participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn. Windolph, one of the few survivors, was a private in Company L, 7th Cavalry Regiment. Check out Windolph's startling description of Custer's last stand. Charles Windolph participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn as a member of the U.S. Army. Windolph, a private in Company L, 7th Cavalry Regiment, was among the few people who survived. On that fatal Sunday, June 25th near noon, we reached the split between the Rosebud and the Little Bighorn. Our regiment was in column of march, riding west. The soldiers of each company rode four abreast with a gap of 50 or 60 feet between companies. We came to a stop abruptly, and Lieutenant Cook gave Benteen the order to lead his company H.D. under Captain Weir and Duke, and K under Lieutenant Godfrey to survey the hills and confront any enemies they came across, while Major Reno commanded forces M, A, C, and G, with the majority of the Indian scouts under Lieutenants Varnum and Hare. General Custer kept units I, F, C, and L. With 600 men divided into detachments, our 7th Cavalry pursued Indian forces across difficult terrain. We were aware that there was a substantial hostile force 12 to 15 miles to the west, but we were unsure of how many. Although Custer and the majority of officers assessed that they were up against 1,000 to 2,500 warriors who were probably ill-armed, our Indian scouts suspected several thousand hostiles. The Indians were able to flee because they anticipated a rearguard operation. Rather, we were up against a force that might have been twice as large, outnumbering Custer's 600 soldiers 5 to 1. On June 26th, Custer intended to launch a surprise dawn attack. But when opposing scouts spotted his column, he chose to strike right away. Benteen rode ahead to scout with 3 soldiers in tow. The horses found the rugged terrain we traveled over difficult. Lieutenant Gibson signaled back that he did not see any Indians from each consecutive hilltop. Even the soldiers in the ranks believed our mission was pointless. 2 hours later, we were glad to be back in the small valley and turned back into Custer's trail. The slow pace of the pack train was highlighted when we went west down a little stream, when the lead pack mules became trapped in a muck. We heard shooting in the distance as we were leaving. Benteen was in front of Captain Weir, who was in charge of his company. We were all aware that combat was imminent. We passed a burning teepee shortly after emerging from the marsh, which was probably started by our Indian scouts. The horses were restless when they sensed danger. At this point, we witnessed our Sergeant Knipe from Tom Custer's Marine Troop giving Captain McDougal the order to hurry up with the pack mules. He was told to go back down the trail by Benteen. Next, we saw trumpeter Martini, who was injured but conveying a message from Custer to Benteen to bring the packs as soon as possible. I knew Martini, a tough little Italian who had fought alongside Garibaldi as a drummer boy during the Italian liberation movement, because he was a member of H Troop. After this battle, we stopped making light-hearted jokes about him. He demonstrated that he was a real metal man. Martini was unaware that his horse was bleeding heavily from a bullet wound in its right hip. He was told to return to Benteen's company. Since Sergeant Knipe had already sent the message to bring on the pack train as soon as possible, I have always assumed that Benteen felt there was no need to send Captain McDougal any further word. Either way, Martini's horse was tired and found it difficult to follow us. As the sound of heavy shooting increased, we soon came across a few Indian horses being driven by a number of Crows or Re-Scouts. They yelled at soldiers and pointed to the hills that rose toward the north. We were aware that heavy fighting was taking place nearby, and that we were getting close to the Little Bighorn Valley. Anticipating an impending confrontation with hostiles, we galloped up the bluffs as Benteen ordered us to draw our weapons. The river valley abruptly opened up in front of us to the left as we ascended the first set of undulating hills. Even the most courageous men would have been terrified by the sight before our eyes. Figures on horseback were rushing frantically below us, maybe 150 feet or more down in the valley, and there were gunshots coming from all sides. We believed that the vast groups of mounted men farther down the river were Indians. We were traveling quickly ourselves and had just gotten a view of this terrible battlefield when we noticed men on a knoll to the north, both mounted and dismounted. With our hearts racing with excitement, we rode quickly in their direction. I'll take a moment to share the story of our friend's fate with Reno. Remember how Reno was given charge of 3 regiments, 17 Crow and Re-Scouts, and 3 White Scouts at approximately 12:15 p.m. 5 men under Custer's command advanced in a column to the right, while Reno's column marched to the left. Being with Benteen, I was not present for the next 5 hours while he and his 3 soldiers were sent to scout the rugged terrain to the south and west. Nevertheless, I have heard the story so much that I will try to present it as simply as possible. Please be aware that I am retelling the survivor stories and was not there. The 2 battalions would descend into the dry creek bottom, sometimes within 50 yards of one another and other times up to 200 yards apart. In the direction of the small Bighorn, both columns jogged westward. They discovered a blazing teepee at around 2 p.m. that contained the body of an Indian warrior who had been slain less than 20 miles away a week earlier in General Crook's conflict with the Indians. While staying out of rifle range, one of the White Scouts in front of Custer yelled out that there were hostiles close by. With the understanding that the entire army would back him, Custer then gave Major Reno the command to cross the creek and gave Adjutant Cook instructions to give Reno the Little Bighorn 2 miles farther west before charging the Indian hamlet to the right. Many people have argued over this final statement in relation to the terrible events that were going to happen. Reno led his 120-man force across the Little Bighorn Ford at a fast pace, with a few guides and scouts behind. They barely stopped to water their horses and reorganize their troops on the river's west bank. On the west bank of the river, there was a low plateau that led to a comparatively level valley that was between half a mile and a mile wide. The Wolf Mountains rose sharply on the other side of the Little Bighorn, and coulees occasionally descended from the bluffs to the riverbed. The river had a gravelly bottom, was between 100 and 150 feet broad, and flowed cold and clear. The Indian encampment were set up along the west bank for about 3 miles, with the 5 Sioux tribes, the Cheyennes, Blackfeet, and Arapahoes, occupying distinct circles that were roughly a quarter of a mile apart. Large herds of ponies grazed to the west, protected by squaws and Indian lads. About 10,000 Indians, or 1/3 of all Sioux tribesmen, are thought to have been present, including 2,000 to 3,000 warriors. Now is a good time to clear up a widespread misunderstanding about the Dorm's arms. Not all combatants had access to contemporary, repeating Winchester rifles and plenty of ammo, unlike what is commonly believed. I estimated that half of the fighters only had bows, arrows, and lances, while the other half employed a variety of antiquated muzzleloaders, single-shot rifles, and other weapons. Of the fighters, only around 25 to 30% had a contemporary, repeating rifle. One more crucial detail. Indian boys who were at least 14 years old joined the fighters and took an active part in the conflict, particularly in its latter phases. Meanwhile, the soldiers were equipped with Springfield carbines, which are single-shot weapons with a caliber of 45 to 70 and are known for their accuracy and dexterity up to 600 yards. Rapid firing, however, would foul the breech and frequently trap the greasy cartridges, making it impossible for the extractor to remove them. This made it necessary to forcefully extract the empty shell using a hunting knife, a practice that resulted in the deaths of numerous troopers on that tragic Sunday. A 6-shot single-action Colt Army revolver, the newest type on the market, was also carried by every soldier. The soldiers were instructed to have 24 rounds of revolver ammunition and 100 rounds of rifle ammo in their saddlebags or on their person. Many of the horse mounts were stampeded when the troops dismounted, and every 4th man became a horse holder, costing thousands of rounds of desperately needed ammunition, especially for Custer's soldiers. However, they lined up in columns of 4s, with the Indian scouts on their left, to cross the river and return to Reno's regiment. Soon after, the southern edge of the Indian camps was seen, and Indian horsemen were observed riding furiously in the valley. Reno then spread his 3 soldiers and scouts out across the whole width of the slender valley in a skirmish line. The scouts rode to their left front, while Troop M was on the right, A in the middle, and G on the left. With 75 yards separating each soldier, Major Reno dismounted his troops and formed a skirmish line. They came upon a sizable contingent of mounted Indians who descended upon them after making progress of half a mile toward the Indian camp. Reno's troops held their ground and fired steadily for 10 minutes before being overrun by hundreds of Indians on horseback, many of whom were armed with repeating rifles. Reno gave the command for his soldiers to fall back, mount them in order, and retreat 300 yards after realizing the danger of being encircled. As soon as this was done, hundreds of Indians on horseback descended upon them once more. They held their ground for 10 minutes, but the Indians gradually closed in from all sides, firing at close range and causing significant casualties. Fearing total encirclement, Reno ordered his men to withdraw to a grove of cottonwoods half a mile to the rear. Reno had arranged his troops in a skirmish line and dismounted once more, firing steadily. The greatest number of casualties happened here, as the confusion caused many troopers to become separated from their companies, the horses to stampede, and the men to break in wild disorder. Many troopers were shot from their horses, killed instantly, or butchered and scalped. Roughly 15 to 20 soldiers were killed in the river and along the riverbank, and the Indians withdrew once Reno's men reached the top of the steep hill on the east side. The survivors crossed the river in disarray and ascended the hill while being closely followed by hundreds of mounted Indians. Captain Weir and his D Troop arrived at this crucial point at 2:30 p.m., closely followed by Benteen's troops H and K. Although Reno's forces were in disarray, the reinforcements brought some order, and Benteen promptly assessed the situation and ordered his men to take defensive positions. Captain McDougall's Troop B and the pack train soon joined them, bringing much-needed supplies and ammunition. In anticipation of a last-ditch defense, the Allied forces consolidated atop the hill. Custer, meantime, had moved down the river with his 5 troops, hoping to flank the Indian village. They saw the main building of the hostiles as they went north along the bluffs. The whole extent of the Indian forces was revealed at the valley's northern end, close to the location of the Custer National Cemetery today. The sheer force of the warriors quickly overpowered Custer's soldiers. They fought till the very end, but were encircled and killed in spite of their heroic efforts. Realizing the terrible destiny that had probably befallen their friends, Reno and Benteen's forces atop the hill could hear the far-off noises of fighting as dusk set. With sporadic clashes as the Indians tried their defenses, the night was filled with tense suspense. After winning by a landslide, the Indians started to retreat in the morning. This narrative offers a thorough and striking look at one of the most famous engagements from the 1876 Great Sioux War. Watch this space for additional first-person reports of other conflicts. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you later. 2 days later, General Terry's column finally arrived to relieve the remaining members of Reno and Benteen's battalions. One of the most significant and tragic moments in American history is still the Battle of Little Bighorn. The valor and tenacity of warriors like Charles Windolph, who lived to share their story, provide a moving window into the brutality of frontier combat.